delivering the world to your doorstep. From breaking news to in-depth features, from politics to culture, from science to sports. Welcome to SNN Primetime News with Kennedy Lucas Patterson.
Vice President Harris is also swinging through purple states, introducing her running mate, Democrat Tim Walz, to the country. In Eau Claire, Wisconsin today, like last night in Philadelphia, she spent a lot of time talking about how the governor of Minnesota started his career.
To his former high school students, he was Mr. Walz. And to his former high school football players, he was Coach. Coach.
Walz taught global studies and was an assistant football coach at Mankato West High School until he won a seat in Congress in 2006. NPR senior White House correspondent Tamara Keith spoke with some of his former students. Students say Walz taught his global studies class in a way that got everyone involved in the conversation and pushed them to expand their horizons. Noah Hobbs was a C student, the kind of kid who could easily slip through the cracks. But he says Walz took an interest in him, and the enthusiasm rubbed off.
Leaving his class, going to the next one is really hard to not want to continue to learn because it's like the sugar high that doesn't stop.
Walz was known for drinking Diet Mountain Dew, and former student Will Handke fondly tells the story of watching his teacher down a bag of Oreos during a field trip to China.
I heard some crunching and munching and looked out over the side and saw Walz's hand zipping into the bag of Oreos as fast as I possibly have seen any hand move. And that bag of Oreos disappeared very quickly.
When Walz ran for Congress, Handke worked as an unpaid intern on his first campaign, including helping out at parades.
He doesn't let any hand get unshaken. Walz would run back and forth, shaking hands. This man does not stop.
Former student Sam Hurd also volunteered on the 2006 Walz campaign.
And we even got to go to the party at the Holiday Inn downtown on election night and see all of our teachers having a few beers at about midnight. It was great.
Hurd now works as a teacher himself, and when I caught up with him, he was in the car with another former student headed to the Harris-Walz rally in Philadelphia. There's still very much like a Mr. Walz goes to Washington feeling about all of it, even though he's been doing that for, 15, 20 years. Christina Rothenberg was a student the last year Walz taught, and then saw him on a school field trip in Washington, D.C. 1 year you have him as a teacher, the next year you go see his office in D.C. is pretty amazing. Rothenberg says he went out of his way to get her and a friend a tour of the White House. He had to walk to the White House, show his I'm a congressman badge so that we could do the tour, and then he went back to his job of being a congressman. I think he'd still do that today, by the way. What I see is kind of the same person that I grew up with. Mitch Salisbury was a freshman on the varsity football team Walz helped coach that won the state championship. A lot of coaches will bring energy, kind of that fake energy where it's rah, 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 but Mr. Walz brought passion every day. He loved to coach, he loved to teach, and he had a way of pushing people to meet their potential, of making you want to be better, says Salisbury. A couple of years after leaving the classroom for Congress, Walz returned to speak at Mankato West High School. Noah Hobbs says Walz made it clear he remembered him.
I wasn't a bad enough student that I should be remembered. I also was not a good enough student that I should be remembered, but 2 years removed of being my teacher and remembering that I was habitually tardy, to his class and every other class, that's pretty incredible.
Years later, Hobbs ended up running for office himself and just wrapped up 6 years on the Duluth, Minnesota City Council. He says Walz showed him that you don't have to go to an Ivy League school or come from money to get into politics and make a difference.
Global stocks climb as U.S. recession fears ease. The stock index of the UK's biggest publicly listed companies edged higher on Friday after concerns eased over the state of the U.S. economy. The FTSE 100, which is made up of the country's biggest businesses including banks, airlines and house builders, rose in early trading. It follows stronger trading in the U.S. where stock markets had their best day in almost 2 years on Thursday. Global financial markets have been spooked in the past 7 days over fears that world's biggest economy could be heading for a slowdown. But on Thursday, official data revealed U.S. unemployment claims rose by less than expected. The benchmark S&P 500 index ended the day 2.3% higher. The Dow Jones Industrial Average rose 1.8%, and the Nasdaq jumped 2.9%. In London, the FTSE 100 ticked up 0.7%. Stock markets indexes in Paris and Frankfurt followed a similar path. Stocks in Asia made modest gains, recovering some of the losses after Japanese indexes had their worst day since 1987 earlier in the week. The U.S. latest jobless claims data, though not normally a major market event, supports the view that recent pessimism may have been overdone, said UBS Global Wealth Management. Official figures from the U.S. Labor Department showed first-time claims for unemployment benefits in the U.S. had fallen more than expected to 233,000 last week. But despite the apparent recovery in global markets, analysts warn that trading will likely remain choppy for the time being. The market volatility is creating trading opportunities for investors over the short term, said Peter McGuire from trading platform XM.com. It will be a bumpy ride over the election season, and we all await the U.S. Federal Reserve policy decision in September. The Federal Reserve held off cutting interest rates last week, something that typically boosts growth, in contrast to other central banks such as the Bank of England. But this week's market upheaval stoked further speculation about when, and by how much, the Fed will cut borrowing costs. The Fed is now likely to cut rates up to 50 bits per second in September, which in turn supports expanding valuation for the market, said Junbei Liu, portfolio manager at Tribeca Investment Partners.
Confronting violent settlers in the occupied West Bank, together. Like every morning, there was tension. It crackled in the air like static. So much was happening lately that only a fool would walk into the hills and not be on their guard. The sun was already high, pulsing heat across the stillness of the land. There was the sound of the animals' bells, men and boys whistling to call in the dogs. High on the hill opposite was the Jewish settlement of Rodam. Close by was an Israel Defense Forces (IDF) post, there to protect the settlers. Anybody looking down would see the gathering at Ahmad Darham's home, the Palestinian shepherd, the Israeli activists who support him, the foreign journalists with their camera. Chatting to Ahmad was a 71-year-old Jewish man who regularly accompanies the shepherd into the hills, in spite of violence and harassment. A man who, I sense, is not going to back down from any fight he believes to be righteous. When I am convinced that my positions are true, I am ready to fight for my beliefs. Call it stubborn? All right, says Gil Alexander. He belongs to the Jordan Valley Activists, a group of Israelis committed to protecting Palestinians. They accompany shepherds to and from the grazing lands. Maybe the settlers would appear around Al Farisiya this morning, maybe not. The harassment was more frequent since Hamas attacked Israel on October 7, killing about 1,200 Israelis and kidnapping 251. Settler violence that had been going on for years in the West Bank was escalating sharply, aimed, the Palestinians believe, at driving them off the land. According to OCHA, the UN Office for Humanitarian Affairs, there have been more than 1,000 attacks by settlers against Palestinians since October, with at least 1,390 people, including 660 children, displaced. Lethal violence has frequently accompanied the attacks. OCHA recorded 107 that led to Palestinian fatalities and injuries, 859 causing damage to Palestinian property. Thousands of trees and saplings belonging to Palestinians have been destroyed. Farmers like Ahmad describe how access to water for families, crops, and herds is regularly blocked or limited. International attention has been focused on Gaza, but the scale of settler violence prompted the US, the EU, and Britain to impose sanctions on some settler leaders and, for the first time, against entire settler outposts. The activists in the Jordan Valley understand that the important thing is to stay calm, no matter how much provocation there is. Gil Alexander knows what the settlers are capable of even when no resistance is offered. He has the scars to prove it. But this morning he is upbeat. A day like this, he says, it makes me feel good. If we can prevent attacks, that gives me satisfaction. Gil has become a good friend of Ahmad Daram, who's been harassed repeatedly. Ahmad accuses the Israeli army and police of taking the side of the settlers, a claim supported by numerous reports by Israeli and Palestinian human rights activists. Pointing to the hills around him, down to the main road, Ahmad says, "The problem is, all this land is forbidden for us. This hill is forbidden, all of it is forbidden. This situation is a mess. It doesn't matter if we have permission or we don't, they are always creating problems for us. We climbed up into the hills, over rocks and gullies, until a valley opened out below us. The land was auburn-colored, covered with dried stalks of recently cut corn, good fodder for hungry sheep. Ahmad was ahead of us on his donkey, leading the flock towards the grazing land, as his forefathers had done for generations. A mountain deer flickered through the heat haze and vanished. The picture was of a pastoral Eden. In reality, it is a bitter battleground. Last December, Gil Alexander and another activist were with Ahmad when settlers attacked at night. They were badly beaten and pepper sprayed. In an incident elsewhere in the valley, Gil collapsed to the ground trying to prevent a settler from scattering a Palestinian flock. He has experienced constant threats. The fact that he is a devout religious Jew infuriates the settlers, who believe the West Bank, the ancient lands of Judea and Samaria, belong to the Jewish people. Gil is the son of French Jews and emigrated to Israel when he was 20. His father fought in the French resistance against the Nazis. "I feel like a representative of a humanitarian religious Judaism," Gil says. "There are few today in Israel. The Palestinians like Ahmad Daram have lived under occupation since Israel conquered the territory in the Six-Day War of 1967. Since then, over 160 settlements have been built in the occupied territories, including East Jerusalem, with around 700,000 Jewish residents. There are approximately 3 million Palestinians in the West Bank and East Jerusalem." For Gil Alexander, who describes himself as a Zionist, Israeli territory should end at the 1967 borders. Any settlements in the West Bank should only exist with Palestinian consent. "We can love this land without being the owners, the sole owners of the land. In order that we are not constantly holding the local population by force, we should give away part of this land, in the hope that we will be able to get there freely later on." Gil says only this can avoid the national religious conflict that has existed for 100 years since Zionism existed, between the Palestinian population and the Jewish population. Although Gil believes nothing is impossible, such an idea seems far-fetched in the bitter politics of the present. Israel now has the most right-wing government in its history. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu depends on the support of pro-settler parties for the survival of his governing coalition. Recently, Israel's far-right finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, spoke of mega-strategic moves to expand settlement activity with government funding. 3 weeks ago, the government declared nearly 3,000 acres in the Jordan Valley as state land, the largest such amount in 3 decades. It comes on top of a similar declaration of nearly 2,000 acres in the area in March. The Top Court, the International Court of Justice, has described the Israeli occupation as de facto annexation and in breach of the Convention on the Eradication of Racial Discrimination, which condemns racial segregation and apartheid. Ahmad Daram knows how it works on the ground. Speaking of his old grazing pastures, he says, "All these areas, all these places, we are not allowed to reach them. Some have been planted with olive trees. Some became reserved areas. They want us to leave this area. They want to be here. They don't want us to be here." The political momentum is with the settlers. Israel's parliament, the Knesset, recently voted by a majority of 68-9 to reject a Palestinian state on the West Bank on the basis that it would pose an existential danger to the State of Israel and its citizens, perpetuate the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and destabilize the region. Mr. Netanyahu has repeatedly stated that Israeli security control over the West Bank is essential for the country's safety. To someone like Shai Rosengarten, people like the Jordanian Valley activists are radicals who should stay out of the West Bank. He says the settlements in Israel are very important because we think that in Israel we have to connect to our heritage. Coincidentally, like Gil, he is descended from Holocaust survivors. His grandfather arrived in Israel from Poland in the years after the war. Shai is a leading figure in the Zionist organization Im Tertzu, which supports the settlements. Settler violence, he says, is only carried out by a minority. He claims that what he calls radical human rights activists are the problem. We see them as radical. And we see their activity as interrupting military activity. So this is very bad for the area. I asked Shai if what he really meant was that it was bad for the settlers. No, I actually mean that they are interrupting military activity. Of course, they're trying to harass settlers, but they're also trying to harass soldiers. And we have many examples of those kinds of activities coming in front of Israeli soldiers and just, put their camera in front of their face. And this is very, very harming, and this is very bad for the Israeli soldiers that need to concentrate on what is happening. Gil adamantly rejects such a characterization and argues that he is defending true Jewish values. He is part of an Israeli minority who have little political influence at the moment. But standing in the shade of an acacia tree, with Ahmad rounding up the sheep and goats to corral them for the night, Gil Alexander insisted there was hope for a peaceful end to a conflict that he believed had no military solution. We have no choice. War, it's obvious, will provide nothing. From war to war, we are weaker and weaker. Even our strength has limits.
Trump fights for spotlight as Democrats dominate coverage. On Thursday, Donald Trump walked into a room of journalists gathered at his Mar-a-Lago estate for a news conference. He didn't look particularly happy. His remarks came after a week in which Kamala Harris and her new running mate Tim Walz have dominated media attention, raked in millions of dollars and enjoyed a bump in polling. Trump's media event seemed more an attempt to win back the spotlight than announce anything new. Just before Trump stepped up to the podium, one of his advisors texted me the wry assessment that Donald Trump is never boring. The exclamation marks were his. The event included a couple of news items. Trump announced that he'd agreed to join a TV debate with Vice President Harris on September 10. ABC News, the debate host, confirmed that Ms. Harris had agreed to participate as well. Trump also said he'd like to do 2 more debates. There's no word from the Harris team yet on whether they've accepted those additional matchups. Over the course of the hour-long event, Trump took dozens of questions and he chastised Ms. Harris for failing to take questions from reporters since ascending to the top of the ticket. Much of the event, though, was spent on Trump's old favorites, as if he was reaching for his rally hits. He talked about poll numbers, the unfair media, the dire state of the country and, yes, crowd sizes, even comparing his crowds to those of the civil rights leader Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Historically, one way Trump gets attention is by saying things that are controversial. And there was some of that today, too. He suggested America was on the brink of a world war and said Jewish Americans who support Vice President Harris need to have your head examined. This attention deficit is an unusual position for Trump. The former president is not used to having to fight for the limelight, particularly in this election cycle. The Biden campaign was happy to let Trump dominate the news, in the belief that the more the race was about the former president, the better it would be for the current one. The Biden team wanted Trump front and center. But the shakeup on the Democratic side has been dramatic and newsworthy and has pushed Trump off the front pages. To make things harder for the Republican candidate, much of the coverage of Ms. Harris's unexpected roll-out as Democratic candidate has been positive. So, the strategy by Democrats has flipped. Right now, Democrats are enjoying the media attention. Ms. Harris wants this race to be about her. And with all the Democratic political drama, the press has been happy to oblige. Hence the Mar-a-Lago news conference that didn't really have much news. Trump may do better following the advice of Mark Lauder, the Republican strategist who ran communication strategy for his 2020 campaign, who texted me to say the way the former president should win back attention was to stay focused. Define Harris and Walz on policy, he said. He wins on policy and results. To be fair, there was some of that in this press event. Trump repeatedly described Ms. Harris as extreme and liberal. He did tout his own record on the economy and the border. But the attacks got rather lost in his grievance about crowd sizes and how they are reported, and even suggested that there may be something unconstitutional about the Harris campaign. And then it was over. And, as if to prove a point, within minutes of Trump walking off stage, the fickle cable news cameras had shifted their lenses from Florida to Michigan, where Ms. Harris and Mr. Walz were holding a meeting with union workers. It was the Democrats' time for some press coverage. Once again.
Glittering day for GB as Spain deny France in Thriller, Day 14 in Paris. Teenage climber Toby Roberts added to Team GB's medal tally at Paris 2024 with a spectacular gold in the men's boulder and lead final. Katarina Johnson-Thompson ended her long wait for an Olympic medal with silver in the heptathlon, narrowly missing gold despite posting a personal best in the 800m finale. Another silver went to Team GB's women in the 4x100-meter relay, before the men's quartet took bronze in their race. There were more medals for Great Britain at the velodrome as Eleanor Barker and Nee Evans took Madison silver, while Jack Carlin came away with a dramatic bronze in the sprint. While at the Parc des Princes, there was heartbreak for host nation France in the men's football gold medal match against Spain as they lost 5-3, having come back from 3-1 down to force extra time. In the diving, it was disappointment for Team GB's Yasmin Harper as she missed out on adding to her synchro bronze medal, finishing 5th in the women's 3-meter springboard final, while teammate Grace Reed was 10th. Imaine Khalif won Olympic women's boxing gold amid a gender eligibility row. With just 2 more days of competition left, Great Britain are in a tight battle to finish as the highest European nation in the medal table. Team GB are in 5th, equal on 14 golds with host nation France and just 1 medal ahead in total with 57, while the Netherlands are 1 gold further back. Roberts was in provisional first place when Serato Anriku, the final climber and favorite, took to the 15-meter wall. But the world silver medalist from Japan lost his grip and slipped near the top to hand Roberts a dramatic gold. The 19-year-old Briton, who improved his climbing on a wall built by his father in his back garden during the pandemic, had scored 92.1 points in the lead final to take his total to 155.2 to 9.8 points ahead of Anriku in silver. I am just lost for words. To find out that I had got the gold in that moment was truly incredible, Roberts told BBC Sport. I have been training for this moment my whole life. To say it hasn't sunk in is an understatement. I imagine later it will be a flood of emotions. Track and field all-rounder Johnson-Thompson, who made her Games debut at London 2012, finally secured an Olympic medal as she took a hard-earned silver. She narrowly missed out on gold to Belgium's history maker Nafisa Thiam in a dramatic conclusion to the competition. 2-time outdoor world champion Johnson-Thompson trailed by 121 points, equating to roughly 8.5 seconds, heading into the decisive 7th event. Johnson-Thompson opened a significant lead on Thiam during the 800m and crossed the line in a personal best 2 minutes 4.90 seconds. That gutsy performance from the 31-year-old was not quite enough, however, and Thiam took gold at the Stade de France by 36 points to become the first woman to win 3 Olympic heptathlon titles. It was a superb competition from Johnson-Thompson at her 4th Games, recording the second-best points total of her illustrious career. Great Britain's Barker and Evans won a hard-earned silver medal in an enthralling Madison. It took a huge push on the final sprint to give the world champions a total of 31 points, 6 points behind gold medalists Italy who gained a lap to get 20 points, as did Netherlands who took the bronze. There was drama in the men's individual sprint bronze medal race as Britain's Jack Carlin, who was tied at 1 race win apiece, moved up the track and collided with Dutch rider Jeffrey Hoogland. Already on a yellow warning from an earlier race, Carlin received a reprieve with the race restarted after he was judged to have mistakenly caused the collision, and he took advantage to take the bronze medal. The two medals continue Team GB's success in the St. Quentin-en-Yvelines velodrome at these Olympics, with 7 now won. Evans' silver in the Madison also means every member of the British track squad has won a medal in Paris. Great Britain's women claimed Olympic 4x100-meter relay silver before the men's team took bronze in two thrilling races at a rain-sodden Stade de France. Dina Asher-Smith, Imani Lanzaquat, Amy Hunt and Daryl Nada had two tricky changeovers, but Nada was superb on the anchor leg. She almost overhauled 100-meter silver medalist Sha'Carri Richardson down the final straight, but the American dipped over the line first. Zarnell Hughes then started for the men on the anchor leg, running a superb final few meters to secure a medal for the quartet of Hughes, Jeremiah Azu, Louis Hincliffe and Nathaniel Mitchell-Blake. Team GB took advantage of the United States without COVID-hit 100m champion Noah Lyles being disqualified for a faulty first changeover. Earlier on Friday, with pre-games medal favorite Jake Whiteman out with a hamstring injury, it looked like Team GB would be without a representative in the men's 800-meter final after Ben Patterson and Elliot Diles failed to qualify. However, Max Bergen, going in the last semifinal, pulled off a personal best of 1 minute 43.50 seconds to finish third and go through as one of the two next fastest. There was heartbreak for host nation France at the Parc des Princes as they had to settle for silver after being edged out by Spain in the men's football final. A pulsating match saw the hosts take an early lead, only to quickly fall 3-1 behind before halftime and then mount a stunning second-half comeback. Elation turned to deflation for Thierry Henry's side as they could not see the job through, with Spain's substitute Sergio Camelo keeping calm in the most tense of situations to score twice in extra time. The thrilling triumph, which was Spain's first Olympic gold since 1992, continued the nation's recent success, little over a month after they won the Men's European Championship, beating England in the final. They also won the men's under-19 European title last month, while the women's team lifted the World Cup last year.
Delta Airlines hits out at CrowdStrike, alleging $500 million loss. Delta Airlines has expressed frustration with CrowdStrike in a new letter on Thursday, as the two companies continue to trade jabs after last month's global network failure. The US-based carrier accused the cybersecurity company of negligence, saying it was forced to cancel thousands of flights because and had lost at least $500 million, £392 million, as a result. CrowdStrike had denied it was solely responsible for Delta's flight disruptions, which it said continued after other carriers came back online. Delta has since been hit by a class action lawsuit filed on behalf of affected passengers. The global glitch originated from CrowdStrike on July 19, after it had sent out a corrupted software update to customers. Microsoft estimated it disabled 8.5 million Windows devices around the world. Delta Airlines services were affected for days after, even as other airlines appeared to have recovered. It cancelled around 7,000 flights over 5 days until July 24, and is now being investigated by the U.S. Department of Transportation over the disruptions. The airline has since blamed CrowdStrike and Microsoft for the disruptions, and has threatened legal action. Both firms have rejected the claim that they were responsible. Delta's CEO Ed Bastian wrote in a filing with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission on Thursday that what happened was unacceptable. "Our customers and employees deserve better," Mr. Bastian wrote, adding that the technology meltdown affected 1.3 million of Delta's customers. CrowdStrike said on Sunday that it would defend itself aggressively should Delta take legal action against it. Microsoft also said it would fight back, and added that its preliminary review shows Delta, unlike its competitors, was operating with an outdated IT infrastructure. In response, David Boyes, a lawyer for Delta, wrote in a letter to CrowdStrike on Thursday that there is no basis, none, to suggest that Delta was in any way responsible for the faulty software that crashed systems around the world. He added that Delta Airlines had invested billions of dollars in its technology, and said it struggled to restore operations because of its reliance on Microsoft and CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike accused Delta of pushing a misleading narrative. A lawsuit has also been filed against Delta on behalf of passengers whose flights were canceled. The legal action stated that no other U.S. airline had canceled 1/10 as many flights. It also claimed that Delta failed to properly compensate passengers, and that it had asked them to sign waivers releasing Delta of all legal claims. Many airlines rely on Microsoft's Office 365 for scheduling. The CrowdStrike failure crashed those systems, meaning firms had to use manual scheduling. CrowdStrike has since been sued by its shareholders, who accused the company of making false and misleading statements about its software testing. CrowdStrike has denied the allegations.
The European nation ruled by sheep, meaning sheep islands, the Faroe Islands owe much of their unique identity to these hardy tangle-head creatures. Standing in the Faroe Islands National Archives in the capital, Tórshavn, I opened a small cardboard box and stared at an ancient book bound in leather and burnished by hundreds of years of handling. Known as Sidabavid, the sheep letter, it's a collection of laws enacted by the Faroes then Norwegian ruler Earl Hakon Magnusson in 1298 and is the nation's oldest surviving document. Among other things, it details the level of compensation to be paid if a man lets his dog chase another man's sheep, takes grazing land away from a neighbor's flock, or drives a wild sheep into another shepherd's herd, thus disturbing the calmer animals. I spent a year living in these sparsely populated islands, and I never felt lonely when wandering by myself through the dark green mountains, since there were almost always sheep within view. For more than a millennium, these hardy tangle-head creatures have grazed the slopes clear of most vegetation apart from grass, physically sculpting the dramatic landscape of this remote windswept nation and shaping the country's identity. Marooned in the North Atlantic between Scotland and Iceland, the Faroes' 18 volcanic islands are effectively a far-flung, supercharged slice of Scandinavia. They're home to traditional wood-built houses topped with turf and the kind of lightning-fast, near-universal Wi-Fi you might expect from other Nordic nations, but also thundering waterfalls, sharp cliffs and jaw-dropping fjords that are leading a record-breaking number of travelers to visit in 2024. First inhabited by Irish monks in the 6th century CE and permanently settled by Vikings in the 9th century, today the Faroe Islands are an autonomous territory of the Kingdom of Denmark. The 54,000 islanders speak their own language, Faroese, which is very closely related to Old Norse. And in case there's any doubt about how crucial the island's sure-footed sheep are to its national identity, one only has to look at its name in Faroese. Faroe, the Sheep Islands. Recent studies suggest that sheep have inhabited the Faroe Islands ever since the first Irish settlers landed here. When the Vikings showed up centuries later, they named the islands after these northern European short-tailed sheep they found living here. Ever since in this rugged remote land, the rearing of semi-wild sheep for meat and wool, alongside fishing, whaling and hunting seabirds, has been key to survival for more than a millennium. Flocks were traditionally sailed to specific parts of the islands, and, then as now, they are usually communally owned. Most Faroese families still have a share in a flock somewhere, and many people, whether they be doctors, lawyers, tradesmen or teachers, will turn out during the autumn roundup to help with the slaughter and divide the meat fairly. And today, nearly every Faroese family still keeps a leg of fermented lamb in the larder all year long. Visitors to the Faroes will see these doe-eyed creatures everywhere, sometimes even in the car park of the island's only airport, happily grazing on roundabouts or munching on the grass roofs of old Faroese buildings. In fact, the island's 70,000 Faroese sheep easily outnumber the Faroese human population. The Faroes are buffeted by some of the strongest winds in Europe, and rain is likely up to 300 days per year. Not much can be grown in this thin soil. A few potatoes, turnips, some carrots and rhubarb are the main crops here. As a result, fermented lamb and mutton are dietary staples. This pungent food, known as skapikjat, is shaped by the Faroes' unique windy but never too cold nor too warm climate. After the autumn slaughter, the meat is hung in sheds called jalla, where it slowly dries and is colonized by a layer of bacteria. The meat acquires a strong cheesy flavor, passing through several stages: moist, riced, dry, turt, and finally fermented, skirpi. According to Jogvan Paul Fjausbach, a microbiologist at the Faroes Food Science and Veterinary Agency, it is the rapid growth of bacteria on the meat's surface that produces its distinctive blackened appearance. We know there are more than 600 species of bacteria identified on the surface of the meat, he explained. But we still don't fully understand the chemical processes that affect the final taste of the meat. It varies according to humidity and air temperature. Some people say they can tell which island the meat has come from by the taste. It's not only the meat that matters. There's an old saying in Faroes, "Aller Faroe gull," meaning wool is Faroes gold. Traditional Faroes knitwear still makes good use of the thick hairy yarn, and knitting clubs are found in every village. Most locals wear the distinctive Faroes hand-knitted jumpers all year round. In a country named after them, it's perhaps natural that sheep have become something of a national symbol. The logo of the National Tourism Board is a ram's head. One of the country's most popular beer brands is Black Sheep. In the center of Tórshavn, home to 40% of the island's population and 8 of the nation's 9 traffic lights, you will see a bronze statue of a ram. The horns shine where the metal has been rubbed smooth by children who love to come and sit on his back. Created by Faroese sculptor Rogvi Hansen, it is just one of several sheep monuments in the capital, including a group of stylized steel sheep munching the grass outside the Nordic House Cultural Center. Aside from feeding the Faroes, clothing them and mowing their roofs, sheep have also provided other civic services over the years. To help raise its tourist profile and, as the Nordic Council of Ministers put it, introduce the Faroe Islands to the world, the Faroese government created a series of films in 2016, made by camera-carrying sheep. They called their Google Street View parody Sheep View, and officials say it resulted in a massive upswing in tourism awareness for the islands. We hoped people would see the funny side of Sheep View, and with a relatively small budget, we thought it might be the kind of unusual idea that would capture people's imaginations, said Gudrid Hodggaard, CEO of Visit Faroe Islands. We do value our sheep, and they are such an important part of our national identity that it seemed very fitting to make them famous around the world. I happen to think our sheep are rather pretty too. Meanwhile, Hogni Reistrup, who runs the local tour agency Guide to the Faroe Islands, reports that they often receive requests from around the world for sheep-related itineraries. I have had clients from other countries where sheep culture is important, like New Zealand and Australia, asking if we can supply a guide who can take them to a farm to meet a Faroese shepherd and even to join in with the autumn roundup. It's a very photogenic time of year, Reistrup said. Tourists can also sample dishes made with the island's famous fermented lamb at restaurants in Tórshavn, notably at Rist, located close to the harbor. Some farmers also offer traditional food experiences under the home dining scheme known as Heimablidni Home Hospitality, while sheep farmer Jacob Patterson offers guided hikes on his land near the village of K.L.P, where visitors trek to a mountain hut to sample wind-dried skapictured mutton made from his own sheep. Eva Erdimmen is the 8th generation of her family to farm sheep on the small Faroese island of Storidimmen, where she lives all alone with her husband Jogvan John and their roughly 500 sheep. I admire these animals, they are so tough and not boring creatures as many people may think, Erdimmen told me, after an exhausting day rounding up the flock on the island's steep slopes. We use a lot of energy running after the sheep and cannot survive here without food and shelter. I feel a bit inferior when I think about how well adapted they are to surviving in this place. They produce lambs and survive all winter on just a diet of grass, and they can withstand wind and rain and snow. To understand just how these hardy creatures learned to adapt to the Faroes' unique climate, visitors can head to Tórshavn National Museum, where a glass display case contains a little family of 3 brown taxidermied sheep. They are much smaller and less woolly than today's Faroese sheep, and they were captured in the late 19th century on the uninhabited island of Litladimmen, just a few miles across the sea from where Erdimmen farms. They are the last known examples of the original Faroese breed the Vikings discovered on the islands when they arrived in roughly 800 CE. Larger and heavier varieties from Scotland, Iceland and Norway replaced the native breed in the 19th century to provide more meat and better quality wool. From Viking settlers to Danish landlords to modern travelers, wave after wave of settlers have blown into the Faroes with the winds over the years. But through it all, the hardy sheep has remained, sculpting the land, shaping a nation, and humbly forging the Faroes' unique identity.